It was just after dawn when Isabella Hart stepped off the city bus and tightened her scarf around her neck. The cold bit into her skin, but she didn't flinch. Her eyes, soft hazel, rimmed with quiet exhaustion, stared up at the grand iron gates of the Whitmore estate, the largest mansion on the east side of Ridgewood Hills. She took a deep breath and rang the bell. No one at the estate knew her real name when she applied. No one asked why she was willing to take a job so far below her qualifications. And Isabella made sure to keep it that way. The gates opened with a groan. A security camera above the entry rotated to track her as she walked down the winding gravel path. Towering oaks framed the estate like silent sentinels. She had been here only once before, during the interview, but something about this place already felt heavy, like secrets lingered in the bricks. Inside, the house was pristine, immaculate, cold, like its owner. Daniel Whitmore, the 40-year-old tech magnate who had disappeared from public view 3 years ago after the death of his wife, was known for his rigid routines and emotional detachment. He barely acknowledged staff. Rumors among the maids said he lived in a ghost shell of his former self. Isabella kept her head down. That's exactly what she wanted. On her first morning, she reported to Martha Jenkins, the longtime head housekeeper. A sweet older woman with a sharp wit and tired eyes, Martha studied Isabella carefully. "You got that quiet kind of strength," she'd said, handing her a tray of silver polish. "I like that. Just don't cross Miss Victoria, and you'll be fine." Victoria Whitmore, Daniel's younger sister, the real force behind the estate's operations. Where Daniel was silent, Victoria was fire, sharp heels, sharper tongue, and always suspicious of anyone new. It took only a day for Isabella to be noticed. Not for the reasons she feared, but because of how perfectly she worked. She didn't speak unless spoken to. Her work was flawless. Every towel folded with military precision, every floor polished to reflect the chandeliers above. She moved like someone trained, not someone desperate. That's what unsettled Victoria. "You said you worked as a hotel maid in upstate New York?" Victoria had asked one afternoon, her tone clipped. "Yes, ma'am," Isabella said without hesitation. Victoria narrowed her eyes. "Which hotel?" Isabella paused, just long enough to seem nervous, not suspicious. "The Crescent," she replied, "a place that had burned down years ago. No records. No questions." Victoria hummed. "I see." She didn't believe her, and Isabella knew it. Days passed. Each one, Isabella memorized the layout of the mansion. She learned Daniel's schedule. When he read, when he walked the grounds, when he locked himself in the sunroom to stare at photos he thought no one else saw. She never spoke to him, until one rainy afternoon, when the power flickered and the mansion went dark. Daniel, pacing in the hallway, almost walked into her. Their eyes met. He looked startled. Not angry, not annoyed, just confused. "I didn't hear you coming," he said stiffly. "I didn't mean to startle you, sir," Isabella replied, lowering her gaze. He hesitated, then stepped closer. For a second, his voice softened. "Have we met before?" Isabella's throat tightened, but she forced a smile. "No, sir." He didn't press it, but that question stayed with her the rest of the night. That evening, Martha found Isabella standing at the back of the kitchen, her hands trembling slightly. "You all right, dear?" Isabella nodded too quickly. "I'm fine, just tired." Martha didn't push. But later, when she brought Isabella a cup of tea, she left a folded note beneath the saucer. "You don't have to run forever." Isabella stared at it, heart pounding. She hadn't told Martha anything, hadn't slipped, hadn't confessed. But something about the way the old woman looked at her made Isabella wonder if she'd ever really hidden anything at all. Meanwhile, Victoria was digging. She had already checked the Crescent Hotel, found nothing, and now she was requesting a background check on Isabella Hart, a name that would lead to a fabricated past carefully stitched together by someone who once knew how to disappear. But even fake names can't bury real truths forever, because there was someone else watching Isabella. From far beyond the gates of the estate, Caleb Monroe, a private investigator, leaned back in his car parked down the hill, scanning the estate through binoculars. A file sat open on the passenger seat beside him. Inside, a photograph of Isabella, except her name wasn't Isabella. It was Aria Langston. And 10 years ago, she had vanished after a scandal that rocked the entire East Coast elite. A missing heiress, a family fortune stolen, and a man who had once saved her life, only to forget her name. But Aria hadn't forgotten him, and she had returned to the place where it had all started, not for revenge, but to repay a debt she could never forget. And the man she owed it to was Daniel Whitmore. Only he didn't recognize the girl he once pulled out of the wreckage that cost him his wife, because she had changed her name, her face, her life. But the truth was still buried, and it was about to come rushing back to the surface, starting with a single, unexpected knock on the door the next morning. One that would shatter everything Isabella had built, and everything Daniel thought he knew. The knock echoed through the marble foyer like a warning bell. Isabella froze mid-step, a crystal vase in one hand and a microfiber cloth in the other. She wasn't expecting anyone. Neither was Martha. Visitors to the Whitmore estate were rare and always pre-approved. But this knock wasn't like the quiet ring of the front gate intercom. This was closer, personal. It came from the side entrance, the one staff used. Martha glanced at her from the far side of the hallway. "Stay here," she whispered. Isabella's chest tightened. "Martha." But the older woman had already walked off, her footsteps soft against the Italian tile. Isabella set the vase down gently. Her hands were trembling again. She knew before Martha even opened the door that something had shifted, like the air had changed weight. It was a feeling she remembered all too well, from boardrooms filled with silent tension to press rooms before a fall, moments before the storm. "Can I help you?" Martha's voice came from the other room. There was a pause. Then a voice Isabella hadn't heard in a decade, just passing along something for Isabella Hart. Martha's silence lasted longer than it should have. Isabella floated toward the doorway. And when she reached the corner, she saw him. Caleb Monroe, still tall, still with that half-smirk like he knew more than he should. He wore a brown leather jacket, worn at the edges. His eyes found hers instantly.
"Hello, Aria."
Martha looked between them, confusion and concern rising in her eyes. Isabella didn't speak. Not at first. Then she stepped forward, lips tightening, and gently shut the door behind her. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, voice barely above a whisper. "Just checking in," Caleb said, shrugging. "Didn't expect you to be cleaning toilets for a guy who used to headline Forbes. Quite the downgrade." Her fists clenched. "You can't be here." "And yet, here I am," he replied, pulling a yellow envelope from his jacket. "I found something. Thought you might want to see it." "I left that life behind," she snapped. "You left a lot behind," he said, his voice losing its sarcasm. "But some of it circling back."
"Fast."
He handed her the envelope. "Inside's a name. Someone digging into your file."
"Not me."
"Someone else." She didn't need to ask who. She already knew.
"Victoria."
Caleb leaned closer. "You're not as hidden as you think, Aria." "Don't call me that," she whispered. He gave a nod. "All right, Isabella. But remember, just because you changed your name doesn't mean your past disappeared." He turned, then paused before stepping away. "Daniel doesn't remember you, does he?" She didn't answer. Didn't have to. Her silence was enough. Caleb sighed. "He will." And then he left. Later that night, Isabella sat in her tiny attic room under the mansion's rafters, the envelope unopened in her lap. Rain tapped softly on the window, and the only light came from a single desk lamp. She finally opened the seal. Inside, a black and white surveillance photo.
"Victoria."
Standing outside a law office downtown. A sticky note attached. "Whitmore wants answers. She's looking in the right places." And beneath that, a name that sent chills down Isabella's spine. Julian Creed. Her uncle. The same man who had tried to destroy her family. The same man who had framed her for the embezzlement that cost her everything. And he was still out there, still playing the long game. The next morning, Isabella slipped quietly into the library, scanning the dusty shelves as she tried to steady her thoughts. She didn't hear Daniel enter behind her. "You're up early." His voice startled her. She turned too fast. He noticed the worry behind her eyes. "I needed to finish dusting the upper rooms," she lied. Daniel crossed his arms. "You always seem to be where no one expects." Isabella gave a tight smile. "I'm just efficient." He studied her. Really studied her this time. "You remind me of someone I used to know," he said softly. Her heart nearly stopped. "I get that a lot," she managed to say. Daniel walked to the fireplace and picked up an old photo in a silver frame. It was a candid shot, him and his late wife, laughing in a vineyard, her hair blowing across his face. "Everything was simpler before," he murmured. "Do you believe in second chances?" he asked suddenly. She froze. Her voice caught. "Sometimes. If people are willing to fight for them." He looked at her again. Something flickered in his expression. Recognition? Memory? She couldn't tell. "Why do I feel like you know what that means better than most?" he asked. She looked away. Because she did. Meanwhile, Victoria stood in her home office, flipping through a thin file labeled Isabella Hart. Her assistant sat nearby, nervous. "There's no digital trail," Victoria said coldly. "No birth certificate. No high school records. It's as if she was born the day she walked through our front gates." The assistant nodded. "Exactly. Which makes it interesting. We pulled facial recognition from the interview footage, ran it against old society archives." Victoria's eyes narrowed. And a pause. "She's not a maid." He slid over a tablet. On it, a headline from 10 years ago. "Langston family fortune scandal. Heiress Aria Langston disappears amid federal investigation." The photo attached? Isabella. Younger. Unchanged. Victoria's lips curled into a grin. Cold. Calculated. "So," she whispered, "that's who you are." Outside the office window, the estate was bathed in golden afternoon light. Inside, shadows were growing. The game had changed. And Isabella, or rather, Aria Langston, was running out of time. The air inside the Whitmore estate turned heavier after Victoria's visit. Isabella, still hiding behind her borrowed name, Isabella Hart, felt the shift. It wasn't just suspicion she sensed anymore. It was something deeper. Something circling her like a vulture in the desert. Victoria hadn't accused her of anything directly, but she'd lingered too long in the hallway, asked too many questions, glanced too often at the old portrait in Daniel's private study, the one with Aria Langston's father at a gala event, now collecting dust but not forgotten. Isabella had no choice but to tread carefully. She still needed more time. The truth about what really happened to her family and how Julian Creed had betrayed her had to come out on her terms. That night, she sat on the edge of her narrow bed in the servants' quarters, fingers clutching an old chain with a locket she'd worn since childhood. Inside it was a photo, her father and her, smiling in front of the Langston estate, long before fire and fraud ripped it all away. The door creaked. Martha entered with a folded blanket and a concerned look. "You haven't eaten," she said softly. "I'm not hungry," Isabella replied. Martha knelt beside her. "You've been distant ever since Miss Victoria came around. You sure everything's all right?" Isabella hesitated, then nodded. "Just tired." But Martha wasn't fooled. "You don't have to tell me anything, Isabella. But if someone's after you, you should know. You've got a friend here. I've seen enough to know when someone's hiding pain." Isabella's eyes watered. It had been so long since someone said that you've got a friend. "Thank you," she whispered. The next morning, Isabella woke early and headed to the East Wing to clean Mr. Whitmore's study before the sun fully rose. She preferred it that way, before anyone else stirred, before the world could ask questions she wasn't ready to answer. As she dusted the large bookshelf behind his desk, her fingers brushed a thin gap in the wood. She paused, narrowed her eyes, and pressed gently.
A click.
The panel slid inward slightly. Isabella froze. Inside the hidden compartment was a leather-bound file with the Langston crest embossed on its front. She pulled it out with trembling fingers. Newspaper clippings, financial records, a black-and-white surveillance photo of Julian Creed speaking with a known crime syndicate leader. All of it damning. Mr. Whitmore is investigating my uncle. Her heart pounded. Was it coincidence? Or had Daniel known who she was all along? Suddenly, a shadow fell across the doorway. Daniel stood there, quiet, unreadable. That file doesn't belong to you, Isabella. Isabella slowly closed the file and turned to face him, her eyes wide but steady. Then why do you have it?
He didn't answer right away.
Because I don't believe the fire that killed Edward Langston and ruined his daughter's name was an accident, he finally said. Silence. Daniel stepped inside and closed the door behind him. His voice dropped to a near whisper. Tell me the truth. Are you Aria Langston? She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Tears welled up in her eyes. Yes. He exhaled like someone who'd suspected the truth, but needed to hear it aloud to believe it. I didn't mean for you to find that file, he said. But I'm glad you did. It means we're finally past the lies. They sat for over an hour. Isabella, no longer pretending, told him everything. About how Julian Creed manipulated her after her father's death, how he doctored documents to make it look like she had stolen funds, and how she disappeared when her name was dragged through the mud. Daniel listened without judgment. I suspected you weren't who you claimed, he admitted. But I also saw a woman scrubbing floors with more dignity than half the CEOs I've met. You didn't walk in here entitled. You walked in humble. He leaned back, studying her. You could have come to me sooner. I couldn't trust anyone, she replied. Not after everything. He nodded. Then let me earn your trust. Let's bring down Julian Creed together. Later that day, as Victoria passed through the hallway, she noticed Isabella emerging from Daniel's study, visibly shaken but resolute. Victoria narrowed her eyes. Something changed. She immediately called a contact at a private investigation firm and pushed harder. Run the name Isabella Hart through every known alias database, she said. And check old Langston family photos. I want to know who she really is. That night, Isabella found a note under her pillow. It wasn't Martha's handwriting. It was sharp, precise, cold. They're closing in. If you want to stay safe, meet me at the train station platform 3. Midnight.
C. Caleb.
She clutched the note with trembling fingers. He'd warned her once before. Was this another warning, or a trap? She had no choice but to find out. At exactly 12:01 a.m., Isabella stood on the dark platform. The station was nearly empty, lit only by flickering overhead lamps and the occasional echo of footsteps in the distance. From the shadows, Caleb Monroe emerged, wearing a trench coat and a haunted expression. You shouldn't have waited this long, he said under his breath. What's happening? Isabella asked. They know. Julian Creed knows where you are. He's not working alone anymore. He has people inside the Whitmore Legal Board. Her stomach dropped. Daniel, she started, is being watched too, Caleb said.
We need to move now.
Tonight. No, Isabella said firmly. I'm not running anymore. For 10 years, I've lived in fear. That ends now. Caleb looked at her for a long moment. Then be ready. Because if you stay, it's war. By morning, Daniel called an emergency meeting with his legal team. Martha, loyal as ever, kept watch for any unusual movements in the house. Victoria received a mysterious email that made her expression twist in confusion. Its sender untraceable, its content a single sentence. Look in the mirror before you expose others. And Isabella? She changed that morning. No longer just a maid, but a woman with a voice, a mission, and a name she was no longer afraid to claim. The morning after her secret meeting with Caleb, Isabella stood in the grand hallway of the Whitmore estate, the scent of fresh coffee and lemon polish in the air, but her mind miles away. Something inside her had shifted. No more hiding, No more silence. She walked with her head high, not as Isabella the maid, but as Arya Langston, the daughter of Edward Langston, the rightful heir of everything Julian Creed had stolen. Daniel Whitmore noticed it immediately. "You're standing taller this morning," he said with a knowing half-smile as she entered his study. "I've been sitting in the dark too long," she replied. "Time to open the windows." He set down his coffee cup. "Then let's tear the curtains wide open." Daniel introduced her to his private attorney that afternoon. His name was Elijah Grant, a quiet man in his early 50s with steel-gray hair and the kind of gaze that said, "I don't lose." He came highly recommended, and more importantly, he hated corruption. They met in a secure room inside Daniel's downtown law office. Isabella told him everything, again, this time with more certainty. Elijah asked the hard questions, took notes, cross-referenced dates, and didn't flinch at the mention of Julian Creed. "What you have is compelling," he said, tapping the folder in front of him. "If we get affidavits, recordings, financial proof, Creed could go down for a dozen charges.
Fraud.
Arson. Attempted murder, if the fire was deliberate." Isabella looked at him. "He did start that fire. He wanted my father dead and me erased." Elijah nodded slowly. "Then we'll need one more thing before we make this public." "What's that?" "A witness. Someone from the inside." Caleb Monroe. The name hit Isabella's mind like a thunderclap. He had worked with Julian, knew the dark machinery behind the curtain. If he testified, this could shift from an accusation to a conviction. But Caleb had disappeared again. As always, back at the estate, Victoria was losing patience. She'd received no response from the PI firm she hired. That made her nervous. She marched into Daniel's office without knocking, something he hated. "I need to talk to you," she said, arms crossed. Daniel didn't look up from his computer. "If it's about the guest list for the museum gala, send it to my assistant."
"It's not," she snapped.
"It's about her." Daniel finally looked up. "Isabella?" "She's not who she says she is," Victoria hissed. "I know it. Her background doesn't check out. No records, no school, no tax filings before 2015. That's not normal." Daniel leaned back.
"Come."
Unshaken. "Have you considered," he said slowly, "that maybe she's hiding from something real? Maybe instead of playing detective, you should try asking her." Victoria narrowed her eyes. "Are you protecting her because she's useful? Or because you've developed feelings?" Silence. Then Daniel replied coolly, "I'm protecting her because someone tried to erase her life, and I don't tolerate injustice. You, of all people, should understand that." Victoria didn't respond, but as she turned to leave, her eyes flicked toward the locked drawer in Daniel's desk. She would find out the truth, even if it killed her. Meanwhile, in a dim apartment on the edge of the city, Caleb Monroe stood at the window, watching the streets below. He hadn't slept. Someone had left a note on his door that morning. "You're running out of time. Choose a side.
Fast."
He knew it came from Julian's people. Maybe even Julian himself. But something had shifted inside Caleb the night he saw Arya Langston again. She wasn't bitter. She wasn't angry. She was brave.
And he wanted a way out.
Redemption. So, for the first time in a decade, he opened a secret vault built into his floorboards. Inside were 3 hard drives, an old voice recorder, and a signed ledger. Documents he'd been too scared to destroy, too afraid to use. His hands trembled as he picked up the voice recorder. He pressed play. "You do this right, and no one will ever question who owns the Langston legacy." Julian's voice. Cold. Arrogant. Undeniable. Caleb picked up his phone. He called the only number he knew was safe. "Isabella," he said when she answered. "I'm ready to talk." Back at the estate, Martha had picked up on the shift in the air. She wasn't just a housekeeper. She had been watching the Whitmore family for years, quietly, protectively. And she had grown to love Isabella like the daughter she never had. That evening, she knocked gently on Isabella's door. "I heard you went downtown with Mr. Whitmore," she said softly. "Is everything all right?" Isabella smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "It will be." Martha stepped forward and placed a small, worn box on the nightstand. I want you to have this.
Isabella looked at it.
What is it? Martha took a breath. Your father once helped my family a long time ago. Gave my brother a job when no one else would. I never told anyone that. But I recognized you the day you walked in. Isabella's eyes widened. I didn't say anything, Martha continued, because I figured you had your reasons. But you're not alone in this, Arya. Tears formed in Isabella's eyes. You knew this whole time? I knew enough, Martha replied, touching her hand gently. And I knew I could trust you to walk your own path. Isabella opened the box. Inside was a pin bearing the Langston family crest and a small key. The pin belonged to your mother, Martha whispered. And the key? That's to your family's safety deposit box downtown. I've been paying the fee all these years. It's still there. The next day, Elijah Grant received a package with no return address. Inside were 3 items: a flash drive, a signed statement, a printed photo of Julian Creed with a red circle around the gun holstered beneath his jacket. Attached was a note. Use it well. See. Elijah called Daniel immediately. We have everything we need. Daniel didn't smile. He only said, then it's time. That afternoon, Julian Creed walked into his downtown office suite like he owned the world. Armani suit, diamond cufflinks, the smug smirk of a man who'd gotten away with murder, literally. But as he poured himself a scotch, his secretary appeared at the door, pale and shaking. Mr. Creed, she stammered, there's a man in the lobby, says he's with a federal task force. Julian's eyes narrowed. The building shook as agents burst in. You're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and obstruction of justice, the lead agent said. Julian barely had time to shout, I want a lawyer, before they cuffed his wrists and dragged him out. As he passed the lobby, he caught sight of a young woman standing beside Daniel Whitmore. It was her.
Arya Langston.
Not hiding, not afraid, looking him in the eye for the first time in 10 years. Julian's smirk vanished. Later that night, Daniel and Isabella stood on the Whitmore balcony, city lights glowing beneath them. You did it, he said. No, she corrected. We did it. He looked at her. What happens now? She thought for a long moment. I stopped cleaning other people's homes, she said. And I rebuild the one that was taken from me. Daniel smiled. And if you ever need help rebuilding, he said, you'll have it. But far across the city, someone was burning files, deleting names, and plotting revenge. Because when one secret falls, others come crashing down with it. And for Arya Langston, the war was far from over. The hallway was silent, too silent. Daniel stood outside Isabella's bedroom door, holding a manila folder filled with documents the investigator had sent over. Her birth certificate, the article from 10 years ago about Arya Langston's disappearance, the old photos, the resemblance was undeniable. He knocked. Once.
Twice.
No answer. Martha said she left for the garden. A soft voice behind him said. It was Victoria, watching him like she already knew what he was thinking. You're going to ask her, aren't you? I have to. Victoria gave a faint nod. Just be careful. Truth has a way of breaking people. Daniel found Isabella, or Arya, by the marble fountain, where she often went to think. Her posture was composed, but her eyes were far off, somewhere buried in memory. He walked closer, the folder in his hand trembling slightly. You lied to me. She didn't turn around.
No.
I hid. Same thing, Arya. That name hung in the air like a ghost, and finally, she turned. Her expression was calm, but a storm brewed beneath it. I didn't want you to find out this way, she said. But I knew it was only a matter of time. Daniel unfolded the documents on the stone bench.
Why?
Why would the daughter of Robert Langston work as a maid under a false name? Arya stared into the fountain. Because my name was poison. After my father died, the board turned against me. My uncle Julian, he forged documents, stole company assets, and blamed me. The media turned it into a scandal. I lost everything. No one believed me. So I ran. Daniel sat beside her, shocked. You were 21. Yes, she whispered. And overnight, I went from billionaire heiress to fugitive. Silence. Daniel watched her. This woman who had lived in his home, taught his staff compassion, cooked his meals, cared for his daughter, and brought peace back into his cold halls. She had never acted entitled, never used her real name. She had served with humility, even when the world owed her justice. Why here? He asked. Why my home? I needed to disappear. Martha took me in, no questions asked. I never imagined I'd end up working for the man whose company once tried to buy out my father's. Daniel blinked. You knew? Of course. I studied every corporate play against my father before the scandal broke. You weren't the villain, Daniel. You were just smart. He exhaled, unsure what to say. I'm sorry, she added, her voice trembling now. I didn't mean to lie. But after all the betrayal I faced, I couldn't trust anyone.
Not even you.
Daniel stood, walking toward the garden arch. His back to her, he finally said, Do you want to come back? Arya looked up, confused. What do you mean? To the real world. To who you were. I have lawyers' resources. If your uncle framed you, we can prove it. She shook her head. I've tried. No one would touch the case. But they will now, he said firmly. Because I believe you. And I won't let this go unpunished. Her eyes welled up, the weight of 10 years of silence breaking loose. Why would you help me? She asked. Because you saved me too, Daniel replied. After my wife died, this house was a tomb.
Cold.
Lifeless. You brought it back to life. You brought me back. 3 months later, the courtroom was packed. Julian Creed, confident and smug, didn't expect to see Arya Langston walk into the courtroom flanked by Daniel Whitmore and a team of legal titans. Nor did he expect the flood of evidence. A hacked email server recovered from his old assistant, financial records, and witness statements that now painted him as the thief he truly was. When the judge read the verdict, guilty on all counts, Arya closed her eyes. 10 years. 10 years of shame, hiding, fear, and now freedom. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed.
Arya.
Will you return to Langston Global? Did Daniel Whitmore fund the legal battle? Are you two involved? Daniel stepped in, shielding her from the cameras. No comment. But Arya turned back, faced the flashing lights, and spoke. My name is Arya Langston. For 10 years, I lived in the shadows, wrongly accused. Today, the truth set me free. I'm not returning for revenge. I'm returning to rebuild, this time with integrity, humility, and strength. And then, she took Daniel's hand. Not for the cameras, but because he had become her truth. 6 months later, Langston Global was under new leadership. Arya walked through the newly refurbished offices, once again at the helm of the empire her father had built. She'd reinstated ethical boards, launched programs for underprivileged youth, and created a special initiative to employ survivors of injustice. In her penthouse office, overlooking the skyline, she placed a small frame on her desk. It was a photo of her in a maid's apron, smiling next to Martha in the Whitmore kitchen. A reminder of where she came from, of what it meant to serve, not rule, of the journey that shaped her.
8.
Later that evening, at a private gathering, Daniel raised his glass. To second chances, to truth, and to the woman who reminded us that titles don't define strength, character does. Everyone clinked glasses, but Arya's eyes were on the stars. Because somewhere in those long, silent nights as a maid, she had dreamed of this moment. Not as revenge, but as redemption. And she had earned every bit of it.